The simple message is the economy is doing well. We have confidence in the robustness of the economy and its resilience to shocks. It's performed well over the last several years. We've created, since the trough in employment after the financial crisis, around 16 million jobs. The unemployment rate has moved way down, and many more people feel optimistic about their prospects. The simple message is the economy is doing well.
Today, millions of Americans say that they believe that the United States is on the verge of a major economic collapse and will soon be entering another Great Depression. But only a small percentage of those same people are prepared for that to happen.
We are in a big, fat, ugly bubble.
The U.S. stock market is going to crash, or the dollar is going to crash.
The global situation has created an environment for financial panic.
It's the biggest bubble I've seen in history, and now we have a bigger stock bubble by far than ever, larger real estate bubbles in many cities, and extreme around the world.
We have the worst financial recovery in 65 years. In the last 8 years, the past administration has put on more new debt than nearly all of the other presidents combined.
There are some dire predictions that, next year, or say a year and 18 months, we have something arriving worse than 2008 and 2009. The downturn is much worse.
It's not a question of will that happen, it's just a question of when.
And the worst scenario for that would be things like Zimbabwe and Venezuela.
The sad truth is that the vast majority of Americans would last little more than a month on what they have stored up in their homes. Most of us are so used to running out to the supermarket or to Wall-Mart for whatever we need that we never even stop to consider what would happen if suddenly we were not able to do that. Already, the US economy is starting to stumble about like a drunken frat boy. When the economic collapse occurs, it will happen quickly. No one will predict it. That's because the signs of imminent collapse are difficult to see. For example, the US economy nearly collapsed on September 17, 2008. That's the day panicked investors withdrew a record $140 billion from money market accounts. That's where businesses keep the cash to fund day-to-day operations. If withdrawals had gone on for even a week, the entire economy would have halted. If the US economy collapses, you will not have access to credit. Banks will close. That means high demand and low supply of food, gas, and other necessities. If the collapse affects local governments and utilities, then water and electricity will no longer be available. As people panic, self-defense becomes more important. When that happens, things are going to get desperate for many people. And desperate people are known to do desperate things. Expect several suicides. Expect several to turn to violent crime. And that includes street gangs and those who are already employed as career criminals. With police spread thin and short-handed, street gangs and career criminals are about to have a heyday taking whatever they want from whoever they can. All it would take for the entire US to resemble New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina would be for a major war, a terror attack, a deadly pandemic, or a massive natural disaster to strike at just the right time to push the teetering US economy over the edge. So just how would you survive if you suddenly could not rely on the huge international corporate giants to feed, clothe, and supply you and your family? Do you have a plan? Unless you already live in a cave, or you are a complete and total mindless follower of the establishment media, you should be able to see very clearly that our society is more vulnerable now than it has ever been. Unprecedented number of large earthquakes around the world, and volcanoes all over the globe are awakening. You could just take a look at what happened to Haiti and in Iceland to see how devastating a natural disaster can be. Not only that, but we have a world that is full of lunatics in positions of power. And if one of them decides to set off a nuclear, chemical or biological weapon in a major city, It could paralyse an entire region. War could erupt in the Middle East at literally any moment, and if it does, the price of oil would double or triple at least. And there is a possibility that much of the entire world could be drawn into this conflict. Scientists tell us that a massive high-altitude EMP blast could send large portions of the United States back to the Stone Age in an instant. In addition, there is a constant threat that the outbreak of a major viral pandemic, such as what happened with the 1918 Spanish flu, could kill tens of millions of people around the globe and paralyze the economies of the world. But even without all that, the truth is that the US economy is going to collapse. So just think of what will happen if one or more of those things does happen on top of all the economic problems that we are having. Are you prepared? The following is a list of 30 things that you and your family will need to survive when the economy totally collapses and the catastrophic disaster begins. 1. Keep some cash at home. This goes along with the previous point. While it is not wise to keep all of your money at home, you do want to keep some cash at hand. If there is an extended bank holiday, or if a giant burst from the sun causes the ATM machines to go down, you want to be able to have enough cash to buy things that your family need. Just ask people of Cyprus how crippling a bank holiday can be. One way to keep cash secure at home is by storing it in a concealed, safe place. 2. Get out of debt. A lot of people seem to assume that the economic collapse would wipe out all debts, but that will probably not be the case. In fact, if you are in a tremendous amount of debt, you will be very vulnerable if the economy collapses and you are not able to find a job. Just ask the people who were overextended and lost their jobs during the last recession. So please, get out of debt. Many debt collectors are becoming increasingly ruthless. In many areas of the country, they are now routinely putting debtors into prison. You do not want to be a slave to debt when the next wave of economic collapse strikes. 3. Gold and silver. In the long term, the US dollar is going to lose a tremendous amount of value and inflation is going to absolutely skyrocket. That is one reason why so many people are investing very heavily in gold, silver and other precious metals. All over the globe, the central banks of the world are recklessly printing money. Everyone knows that this is going to end very badly. In fact, there is already a push in more than a dozen US states to allow gold and silver coins to be used as legal tender. Someday, you will be glad that you invested in gold and silver now, while their prices were still low. 4. Move away from the big cities if possible. For many people, this is simply not possible. Many Americans are still completely and totally dependent on their jobs. But if you are able, now is a good time to move away from the big cities. Where the next major economic downturn strikes, there will be a rioting and a dramatic rise in crime in the major cities. If you are able to move to a more rural area, you will probably be in a better shape. 5. Warm clothing and hiking gear, especially good footwear. If you plan to survive for long in a nightmare economic situation, you are probably going to need some warm, functional clothing. If you live on a cold climate, this is going to mean storing up plenty of blankets and cold weather clothes. If you live in an area where it rains a lot, you will need to be sure to store up some rain gear. If you think you may have to survive outdoors in an emergency situation, make sure that you and your family have something warm to put on your heads. Someday after the economy has collapsed and people are scrambling to survive, a lot of folks are going to end up freezing to death. In fact, the coldest areas, it is actually possible to freeze to death in your own home. Don't let that happen to you. Wool sweaters will keep you warm and alive in sub-zero weather, wet or not. Get them at thrift stores. Military are the best. 6. Hiking boots or comfortable shoes as shelter. When you ask most people to list things necessary for survival, this is not the first or the second thing that comes to mind. But having hiking boots or very comfortable and functional shoes will be absolutely critical. You may very well find yourself in a situation where you and your family must walk everywhere you want to go. So how far do you think you will get in high heels? You will want footwear that you would feel comfortable walking in for hours if necessary. You will also want footwear that will last a long time, because when the economy truly collapses, you may not be able to run out to the shoe store and get what you need at that point. 7. Survival gas mask. It's that one piece of survival gear we always associate with chaos, war, terror, and mass destruction. Events where the air we breathe is not safe, where air is toxic, where air is deadly, and the world as we know it is officially over. In my opinion, way too many survival articles on the web begin by pointing out that water is at the #1 survival need. It's not. Now, I'm not saying that clean water isn't crucial for survival. It's essential, but it's secondary. Access to clean, abundant, breathable air trumps water every single time. Why? Because while it's a well-established fact that you can only survive 3 days without water, less time in intense heat, you can only survive a few minutes without oxygen. 8. Axe, shovel, knife. Staying along the theme of staying warm, you may want to consider investing in a good axe. In the event of a major emergency, gathering firewood will be a priority. Without a good tool to cut the wood with, that will be much more difficult. An axe, or more importantly, more useful and more, basically, a good knife. With a good knife, you can make shelter, get some wood, provide food, and make clothing. Other options are a good spade, shovel, such as a cold steel, special forces, Spetsnaz spade, etc. Get the sheath for whatever you buy. Who needs a Swiss Army knife? This shovel is a chef's knife, axe, grappling hook, entrenching tool, climbing aid, wire cutters, can and bottle opener, sword, shield, band-in cutters, and boat paddle. 9. Self-defense equipment. Whether it is pepper spray to fend off wild animals or something more robust, millions of Americans will one day be thankful that they have something to defend themselves with. 10. Get your ammunition while you still can. Your firearms will do you not much good if you don't have ammunition for them. Already, there are widespread reports of huge ammunition shortages. The following is from a recent CNS News article. The run on ammunition has manufacturers scrambling to accommodate demand and reassure customers, as many new and seasoned gun owners stock up over fears of new firearms regulations at both the state and federal levels. Don't just assume that you will always be able to purchase large amounts of ammunition whenever you want. Get it now, while you still can. 11. A compass and maps to get your BOL by several routes, especially back roads and cross-country. In the event of a major emergency, you and your family may find yourselves having to be on the move. If you are in the wilderness area, it will be very hard to tell what direction you are heading without a compass. It is always a good idea to have at least one compass stored up. 12. A Swiss Army knife. If you have ever owned a Swiss Army knife, you probably already know how incredibly handy they can be. It can be a very valuable and versatile tool. In a true survival situation, a Swiss Army knife can literally do dozens of different things for you. Make sure that you have at least one stored up for emergencies. 13. A hiking backpack. If you cannot carry your shelter, tent, water filter, matches, knife, clothing, etc., you cannot travel with them and provide shelter. If you and your family suddenly have to bug out, what will you carry all of your survival supplies in? Have a good hiking backpack or survival bag for everyone in your family is extremely important. If something happened in the city where you live and you suddenly have to go, what would you put your most important stuff in? How would you carry it all if you had to travel by foot? These are very important things to think about. 14. Shelter. You can't sleep on the streets, can you? Well, some people will be able to get by living on the streets, but the vast majority of us will need some form of shelter to survive for long. So what would you do if you and your family lost your home or suddenly were forced from your home? Where would you go? The best thing to do is come up with several plans. Do you have relatives that you can bunk in with in case of an emergency? Do you own a tent and sleeping bags if you had to rough it? If one day everything hits the fan and you and your family have to bug out somewhere, where would that be? You need to have a plan. 15. Clean water. Most people can survive for a number of weeks without food, but without water you will die in just a few days. So where would you get water if the water supply suddenly stopped flowing out of your taps? Do you have a plan? Is there an abundant supply of clean water near your home? Would you be able to boil water if you need to? Besides storing water and figuring out how you would get to gather water if society breaks down, another thing to consider is water purification tablets. The water you are able to gather during a time of crisis may not be suitable for drinking, so you may find that water purification tablets come in very, very handy. Water filter bottles, pumps and gravity water filters are musts. 16. Lighters or matches. You will also want something to start a fire with. If you can start a fire, you can cook food, you can boil water, and you can stay warm. So in a true emergency situation, how do you plan to start a fire? By rubbing sticks together? Now is the time to put away a supply of lighters or matches, so that you will be prepared when you really need them. In addition, you may want to consider storing up a good supply of candles. Candles come in quite handy whenever the electricity goes out, and in the event of a long-term economic nightmare, we will all see why our forefathers relied on candles so much. There are 17 ways of starting a fire without matches. Learn several and carry the material to do them. 17. A flashlight or lantern. When the power goes off in your home, what is the first thing that you grab? Just think about it. A flashlight or a lantern, of course. In a major emergency, a flashlight or a lantern is going to be a necessity, especially if you need to go anywhere at night. Solar-powered or crank-style flashlights or lanterns will probably be best during a long-term emergency. If you have battery-powered units, you will want to begin storing up lots and lots of batteries. 18. Storing up food. A BOB and BOV should have 72 hours of food. Mountain hose, granola, PBJ nuts, sunflower seeds, etc. Food is going to instantly become one of the most valuable commodities in existence in the event of an economic collapse. If you do not have food, you are not going to survive. Most American families could not last much longer than a month on what they have in their house right now. So what about you? If disaster struck right now, how long could you survive on what you have? The truth is that we all need to start storing up food. If you and your family run out of food, you will suddenly find yourselves competing with the hordes of hungry people who are looting the stores and roaming the streets looking for something to eat. Of course, you can grow your own food, but that is going to take time. So you need to have enough food stored up until the food that you plan to grow has time. But if you have not stored up any seeds, you might as well forget it. When the economy totally collapses, the remaining seeds will disappear very quickly. So if you think you are going to need seeds, now is the time to get them. 19. Learn to grow your own food. This is a skill that most Americans possessed in the past, but that most Americans today have forgotten. Growing your own food in a way to become more independent of the system, and it is a way to get prepared for what is ahead. 20. A first aid kit and other medical supplies. One more serious note, you may not be able to access a hospital or a doctor during a major crisis. In your survival supplies, be absolutely certain that you have a good first aid kit and any other medical supplies that you think you may need. 21. Stock up on vitamins. A lot of preppers do not think about this either, but this is very important. These days, it is becoming increasingly difficult to get adequate nutrition from foods that we eat. That is why it is very important to have an adequate store of vitamins and other supplements. 22. A radio. If a major crisis does hit the United States, what will you and your family want? Among other things, you will all want to know what in the world is going on. A radio can be an invaluable tool for keeping up with the news. Once again, solar-powered or crank-style radios will probably work best for the long run. A battery-powered unit would work as well, but only for as long as your batteries are able to last. 23. Communication equipment. When things really hit the fan, you are going to want to communicate with your family and friends. You will also want to be able to contact an ambulance or law enforcement if necessary. Having an emergency cell phone is great, but it may or may not work during a time of crisis. The internet also may or may not be available. Be sure to have a plan, whether it be high-tech or low-tech, for staying in communication with others during a major emergency. 24. Personal hygiene items. While these may not be absolute essentials, the truth is that life will get very unpleasant very quickly without them. For example, what would you do without toilet paper? Just think about it. Imagine that you just finished your last roll of toilet paper and now you can't get any more. What would you do? Solution? And a huge dollar saver is to use a lab irrigation bottle. Cost $10. And since most families spend $100 to $300 a year on toilet paper, it will pay for itself in a day or two and save you hundreds of dollars annually. Even if you buy one for every member, you are still hundreds ahead. The truth is that soap, toothbrushes, toothpaste, shampoo, toilet paper, and other hygiene products are things that we completely take for granted in society today. So, what would happen if we could not go out and buy them any longer? 25. Don't forget the special needs of your babies and your pets. Young children and pets have special needs. As you store supplies, don't forget about the things that they will need as well. 26. A sewing kit. If you were not able to run out and buy new clothes for you and your family, what would you do? Well, you would want to repair the clothes that you have and make them last as long as possible. Without a good sewing kit, this will be very difficult to do. 27. Extra gasoline. There may come a day when gasoline is rationed or is simply not available at all. If that happens, how will you get around? Be certain to have some extra gasoline stored away just in case you find yourself really needing to get somewhere someday. 28. A backup plan. This is really your first step and priority. Have backup plans to get your BOL. Lastly, it is always important to have a backup plan for everything. If someone comes in and steals all the food that you have stored up, what are you going to do? If travel is restricted and you can't get your bug out location immediately, do you have a plan B? If you have built your house into an integral survival fortress, but circumstances force you to leave, do you have an alternative plan? The truth is that crisis situations rarely unfold just as we envision. It is important to be flexible and to be ready with backup plans whenever disaster strikes. You don't want to end up like the folks in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. You don't want to have to rely on the government to take care of you if something really bad happens. 29. A community. This is basically your goal. Travel as a community or end up in a community as your BOL. During a long-term crisis, it is those who are willing to work together that will have the best chance of making it. Whether it is your family, your friends, a church, or a local group of people that you know, make sure that you have some people that you can rely on and work together within the event that everything hits the fan. Loners are going to have a really hard time of surviving for long. 30. Keep your prepping to yourself. Do not go around and tell everyone in your area where you live about your prepping. If you do, then you may find yourself overwhelmed by visitors when everything falls apart. And please do not go on television and brag about your prepping to a national audience. Prepping is something that you want to keep to yourself, unless you want hordes of desperate people banging on your door in the future. Sadly, most Americans still have blind faith that our leaders actually know what they are doing and will be able to fix things. Most Americans still are convinced that everything is going to be just fine. And of course, the mainstream media does all they can to reinforce faith in the system. Right now, the US Strategic Grain Reserve contains only enough wheat to make half a loaf of bread for each of the approximately 300 million people in the United States. How long do you think that is going to last? Now is the time to get ready. Now is the time to prepare. The United States economy is going to collapse, and incredibly hard times are coming. Will you be able to survive it when it happens? If you are watching this video, that means that you are probably much more awake than the average American is. Please get prepared while you still can. A great storm is coming, and time is quickly running out. For those of you with loved ones in other states, areas of the country, send this on to them. Send this to concerned friends and family who live in unsafe areas of the country, within 50 to 100 miles of cities, coasts, borders. So do you have any points that you would add to the list above? Please feel free to post a comment with your thoughts below.